In 1324, a king entered Cairo with so much gold that the city remembered him for generations. He did not arrive like a soldier. He did not come with fire, threats, or an army ready to conquer. He came as a pilgrim, a man traveling across the desert to reach Mecca. But behind him stretched a caravan so large, so strange, and so impossible to ignore that people stopped what they were doing just to watch it pass. There were camels walking through the dust. There were servants carrying silk and supplies. There were officials dressed in fine clothes. There were guards, horses, tents, gifts, and bags of gold. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Mansa Musa, the ruler of the Mali Empire. Today, people often call him the richest man who ever lived, but that sentence alone is too small for his story. Because Mansa Musa was not just a man with treasure. He ruled an empire built on rivers, deserts, trade routes, cities, salt, and gold. At the time, Mali was one of the most powerful kingdoms in West Africa. Its wealth did not come from one palace or one hidden vault. It came from control. Control of trade. Control of routes across the Sahara. Control of places where gold moved from the earth into the hands of merchants, rulers, and distant markets. Long before Mansa Musa became famous in Cairo, gold from West Africa had already been traveling across the world. It moved slowly, on camels, through heat, through sand, through cities where traders spoke many languages and counted wealth by weight, not by numbers on a page. To the north, merchants wanted gold. To the south, kingdoms wanted salt, cloth, books, horses, and connections. Between them stood Mali, and at the center of Mali stood Mansa Musa. He was a Muslim ruler, and like other Muslims with the means to do so, he decided to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. But for a king like Mansa Musa, even devotion became a display of power. When he left Mali, he did not travel alone. His journey became a moving city, a royal procession crossing one of the harshest landscapes on earth. Imagine the desert from above, a thin golden line cutting through endless sand. At the front, scouts and riders. Behind them, camels loaded with supplies. Then tents, servants, soldiers, officials, and animals carrying gold. Not one chest, not one bag, but enough gold to make every city on the route whisper about the king from the west. The journey was dangerous. The Sahara did not care about crowns. It did not care about silk. It did not care about gold. By day, the sun could turn the air into fire. By night, the cold could settle over the camp like a warning. Still, the caravan moved, slowly, deliberately, like a legend being drawn across the map. Whenever Mansa Musa stopped, the desert changed around him. Tents rose from the sand, fires appeared, animals rested, water was measured, prayers were made, and then, at dawn, the city disappeared again. Only footprints remained. Then came Cairo. At the time, Cairo was one of the great cities of the Islamic world, a place of scholars, markets, mosques, rulers, merchants, and travelers. It had seen kings before. It had seen wealth before. But Mansa Musa's arrival was different, because he did not just carry wealth. He released it. Gold moved through his hands like water. He gave gifts. He spent freely. He helped the poor. He bought what he needed. He rewarded people around him. And everywhere he went, gold followed. In the markets, merchants looked at the coins. On the streets, people repeated stories about the king from Mali. In homes, people asked how a man could carry so much wealth across the desert. At first, it must have felt like a miracle. A foreign king had arrived with treasure. But money has a strange weakness. The more common it becomes, the less magical it feels. When too much gold enters a market too quickly, gold itself becomes less rare. And when something becomes less rare, its value can fall. Mansa Musa had not come to damage Cairo. He had not come to attack its economy. He had simply been generous. But his generosity was so large that people said the value of gold was affected for years. That is the strange power of his story. He shook a city without raising a sword. He disturbed markets without declaring war. He changed prices by giving things away. Most kings became famous because of what they took. Mansa Musa became famous because of what he gave. But Cairo was not the end of the journey. It was only the place where the world began to notice. After Cairo, Mansa Musa continued toward Mecca. The pilgrimage was still a religious act. But now, the story of his wealth traveled faster than the caravan itself. People talked. Merchants repeated what they had seen. Officials recorded what they had heard. Travelers carried the story from one city to another. A king from West Africa had arrived with gold beyond imagination. And once the story entered the world, it did not stop moving. On the return journey, Mansa Musa was no longer just another distant ruler. He had become an image, a symbol, a name attached to gold. But the most important part of his story was not only what he spent abroad, it was what he built at home. When Mansa Musa returned to Mali, he brought more than memories. He brought scholars, architects, ideas, and a stronger connection to the wider Islamic world. Timbuktu, already important, grew into something larger. A city of trade, a city of learning, a city where books, teachers, merchants, and faith could meet at the edge of the desert. Gold could buy silk. Gold could buy horses. Gold could buy buildings. But in Timbuktu, gold also helped buy knowledge. Mosques rose, schools grew, manuscripts moved through the city. People came not only to trade goods, but to exchange ideas. And this is where the story changes. Because if we only remember Mansa Musa as the richest man who ever lived, we miss the larger truth. We imagine a man sitting on treasure. But he was also a ruler trying to turn wealth into power, reputation, religion, architecture, and learning. Gold made people look at Mali, but cities like Timbuktu made them remember it. Years later, far away from West Africa, mapmakers in Europe drew the world as they understood it. On one famous medieval map, Mansa Musa appeared seated like a king, holding gold in his hand. That image matters, because maps were not only geography, they were imagination. They showed what distant people believed was important. And there, on the edge of their known world, they placed a West African ruler with gold. A king whose journey had crossed deserts, markets, courts, and memories. A king whose wealth was so large, it became part of how others pictured Africa. But history has a way of shrinking people into symbols. Mansa Musa became the richest man. A simple phrase, easy to repeat, easy to turn into a headline. But behind that phrase was an empire. Behind the empire were trade routes. Behind the trade routes were miners, merchants, scholars, builders, and travelers. Behind the gold was a world many people were taught to forget. That is why Mansa Musa's story still matters. Not because we can calculate his fortune perfectly, we cannot. Not because modern billionaires can be compared neatly to a medieval king, they cannot. But because his journey forced the world to pay attention. For a brief moment, the wealth of Mali became impossible to ignore. The desert had carried many caravans before, but this one became legend. A king left West Africa as a pilgrim. He crossed the Sahara with gold. He entered Cairo and changed the way people spoke about wealth. He reached Mecca. He returned home. And long after the sand covered the footprints of his caravan, the story kept moving. From markets, to manuscripts, to maps, to classrooms, to videos like this one, the gold made him famous. But the journey made him unforgettable. Because Mansa Musa did not just carry treasure across the desert. He carried the proof that power could rise far from the places the world usually chooses to remember. And somewhere in the silence of the Sahara, beneath the same stars his caravan once followed, the legend still feels alive. A line of camels, a king in gold, a coin falling into the sand, and a world finally turning its head.